babel of the beasts. Did you feel that? Dr. Rina Zhao's fingers hovered over the control panel, her heart pounding as a low, rhythmic hum filled the cramped interior of her submersible. It wasn't just a sound, she could feel it, like a slow drumbeat, vibrating through her bones and aligning her pulse in perfect time. "Feel what?" Adrian's voice crackled over the intercom from the research base on the surface. "What's happening down there?" "It's hard to explain," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the monitor where strange encrypted signals scrolled across the screen. "I'm picking up a signal, but it's more than that. It's almost like my body's responding to it." She pressed her fingers to her wrist, her pulse still throbbing in sync with the frequency of the hum. A strange tingling spread from her fingertips, and for a moment her vision blurred, the edges of her reality warping ever so slightly. "Wait," Adrian said, sounding both curious and alarmed. "Are you saying you're physically reacting to a signal? What does that even mean?" "It means," Rina took a deep breath, steadying herself, "that this is no ordinary reading." She toggled the lights on her submersible, illuminating the ocean floor ahead. "I think it's coming from an object. There's something down here, half buried. It's metallic, I think." She moved the submersible closer, its lights cutting through the murky water to reveal a massive, faintly glowing structure, partially embedded in sand and coral. Strange, intricate carvings wound around its edges, symbols and shapes that seemed both alien and familiar, sparking something in her memory she couldn't place. "Are you seeing this?" she whispered, barely able to believe her own words. Adrian's voice returned, tense and hurried. "Rina, you've just found something monumental. Hang on, I'm pulling up data on the signal. Whatever this is, it's affecting not just you, but hold on." There was a pause, followed by the furious sound of keys clicking on Adrian's end. "Rina, you're not going to believe this. The marine life around you, they're reacting to the signal too." Rina's eyes widened as she looked out into the water. Fish, rays, and even small clusters of sharks moved in perfect synchrony around the artifact, forming swirling patterns that defied known behavior. They circled the object, swimming in rhythmic loops, like they were following an invisible current or responding to a silent conductor. "It's like they're communicating, responding to it," she murmured, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "This isn't migration or instinct, it's coordinated." Adrian's voice turned urgent. "Rina, this is big, possibly beyond what we understand about marine biology. I'm pulling up restricted files, things I shouldn't technically have access to. Just give me a second." Rina kept her gaze locked on the strange object as she waited, watching as the signal's frequency subtly fluctuated. Her fingers twitched involuntarily, the tingling intensifying. It was like the signal was reaching out to her, connecting with something buried deep within her DNA. Her rare genetic mutation had always heightened her sensory perception, something she'd learned to keep quiet around other researchers. But now it felt as though her mutation had attuned her specifically to this frequency, as if the signal recognized her, and her alone. Finally, Adrian's voice returned, breathless with excitement and dread. "Rina, you're not going to believe this. This artifact, it's not unique. It's been documented by several ancient civilizations. There are restricted records of similar objects showing up in different parts of the world, centuries ago." She felt a chill at his words. "How far back?" "Thousands of years at least. Early Polynesian societies described something they called the sleeping stone. According to their oral traditions, it brought enlightenment, but also sowed chaos. The Egyptians found one near the Nile, called it the Eye of the Abyss, and Mayan astronomers recorded an object they described as a mirror that absorbs life. Even indigenous Australians painted symbols in caves they referred to as the Stone of Many Voices. Rina's grip on the controls tightened. Why haven't we heard of this before? Because every society that encountered it eventually walked away, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. They rejected it, hid it, covered it up. It was as if they understood that something about the artifact was too dangerous to be fully explored. A fresh wave of unease washed over her, mingling with the insatiable curiosity that kept her rooted to the spot. She glanced back at the artifact, at the swirling hypnotic formations of marine life still moving around it, and wondered just what secrets it held and why so many had turned away from them. Her monitor blinked with a new message, interrupting her thoughts. The words were plain, but they pierced through her growing sense of wonder with a sharp, cold warning. The arrival is not what it seems. Rina's stomach dropped. Adrian, she whispered, barely able to contain her fear. I just received an anonymous message. It says, the arrival is not what it seems. There was a pause before Adrian spoke again, his voice strained. Who would send something like that? Rina, you're on a closed network. Nobody should even be able to reach you down there. I don't know, she replied, her voice tight. But whoever they are, they know about the artifact, and they're afraid of it. Adrian's voice turned tense. Rina, maybe we should rethink this. If entire civilizations walked away from this thing, maybe we should too. What if there's a reason they all chose to abandon it? Rina took a deep breath, glancing back at the swirling patterns of fish, rays and sharks, still converging around the artifact. The rhythmic pulsing called to her, a strange allure mixed with an unmistakable sense of dread. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable, a mystery that had waited for millennia in the dark depths, waiting for someone like her to come along. We've come too far to turn back now, she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. If this artifact holds answers that entire civilizations were afraid of, then we need to understand why. Silence filled the line as Adrian absorbed her words. All right, but be careful. If things go wrong, I'll be careful, she promised, though something in her gut told her this was only the beginning. Whatever knowledge lay buried within this artifact, it had already begun to change her, and she feared that soon it would do much more. The artifact's signal had grown louder, the vibrations from its frequency now filling every corner of the research station. Rina felt its pulse more intensely, as though it was pulling her deeper into its rhythm with every passing hour. The artificial intelligence they'd integrated into the project, built to decode patterns and language, began exhibiting unexpected behaviors. What had started as a helpful translation tool now felt almost like a presence, its responses shifting into a strange, deliberate cadence that made Rina's skin prickle. It's like it's thinking, she said, staring at the console as the AI relayed new, decoded fragments of the signal. Adrian shrugged, his gaze fixed on the data. Isn't that what we wanted? For it to interpret the patterns? Yes, but... She hesitated, searching for the right words. It doesn't sound like interpretation anymore. It sounds like communication. The AI's synthesized voice had started forming words, broken sentences that barely made sense but carried an eerie consistency and tone, something foreign that didn't belong to either of them. Even more unnerving was the effect it had on her. Her genetic mutation, usually a subtle sensitivity that allowed her to perceive small shifts in environment, was now intensifying in unpredictable ways. She found herself slipping into strange, disorienting states, where her senses blurred together, each sound turning into flashes of light or pulses she could feel in her skin. Once, while staring at the artifact's display on her screen, she'd felt the sudden urge to blink, and in that moment her vision shifted. She saw, as though through the eyes of a distant creature, the dark expanse of the ocean stretching endlessly, felt the electric impulses through its nerves as if they were her own. She'd tasted salt in her mouth, her heartbeat slowing to a steady, primal beat she couldn't shake even after snapping back to herself. Adrian had witnessed her episodes more than once. He'd observed her without judgment, almost with a scientific curiosity that unsettled her. "It's as if your senses are meshing, like you're seeing colours in sounds," he'd noted once, a touch of fascination in his voice. She'd brushed it off with a tight smile, even though she'd felt herself unravelling in those moments. And each time it happened, her connection to the artifact felt stronger, more invasive. The ancient records Adrian had found detailed civilizations that had once tried to study artifacts like this one. The Egyptians had called it the Eye of the Abyss, and according to their texts, it had appeared on the banks of the Nile in a time of great prosperity. Scholars believed it would bring them closer to the gods, a source of wisdom, but over time it had driven them to paranoia, dissonance, and even violence. They'd sealed it away in a forgotten temple, their attempts to control it abandoned. The Mayans had called it a mirror that absorbs life, discovered during a major astrological event. Priests had claimed it held cosmic knowledge, but they'd ultimately feared the loss of individual will it imposed on those who spent too long in its presence. They'd recorded its coordinates and buried the artifact in obscurity, warning future generations to avoid it. And the indigenous Australians, according to their cave paintings and symbols, had named it the Stone of Many Voices. Their warnings were perhaps the clearest, speaking of a presence that could awaken hunger and bind minds. The paintings showed communities divided, figures with vacant eyes, hands reaching out to nothingness. They believed the artifact would return in cycles like the ebb and flow of the tide, and that humanity would face its influence again and again. One evening, Adrian approached her, his face tense with an urgency she rarely saw. "Rina, think about what this could mean for humanity. These civilizations may have walked away, but they didn't have the technology we do now. Imagine what we could achieve if we learned to harness it." She shook her head, her unease swelling. "Adrian, I think they walked away for a reason. Every account says the same thing. It brings knowledge, but it costs more than we realize." His jaw clenched, and for a moment she saw a flash of anger in his eyes. "You're just afraid of the unknown, Rina. Isn't it worth the risk to find out what we're capable of?" "Capable of, or controlled by?" she shot back, her voice low. "I don't want to give up my mind, Adrian. Not to this thing." He looked away, frustrated. She knew he had his reasons, his motivations. Adrian's mother had a degenerative brain disease, a slow, painful deterioration that had left her a shadow of her former self. He was desperate for a breakthrough, and Rina knew that, in his eyes, the artifact might be that miracle. But to her, it was a Pandora's box they were better off keeping closed. Their arguments grew more frequent, their perspectives clashing as the AI moved closer to decoding what it ominously referred to as the arrival protocol. The voice it used seemed almost otherworldly now, the tones and pauses in its cadence mimicking no language she'd heard before. The AI's voice alone was starting to create disturbing effects within her, amplifying the strange sensory crossovers that her mutation seemed to pick up. She'd catch herself touching the walls of the research base, feeling textures that weren't there, seeing flashes of colour when Adrian spoke. One evening, Eli, an indigenous consultant with whom they'd been working remotely, called her, his tone sombre. Eli was an expert on ancient lore and had worked to interpret the significance of indigenous cave paintings connected to the artifact. "Rina, you need to listen carefully," he said, his voice thick with conviction. "We've seen this before. The artifact, the stone of many voices, as we call it, it cycles. It wakes, it pulls people close, and then it devastates them." "What do you mean by devastates?" she asked, feeling a chill run through her. "Are you saying it has a will of its own?" "Not exactly a will, but a purpose," he replied. "Our elders believed that the artifact was part of something larger, a web or a network that spans across the world, maybe beyond it. It awakens hunger and binds minds, Rina. That's what our people have always known. Those who walk too close lose themselves." As his words sank in, she felt her dread deepen. Her instincts told her Eli was right, but her connection to the artifact was like a tether, pulling her toward answers she feared yet needed to know. When she relayed Eli's words to Adrian, hoping he'd understand, he dismissed them. "It's just mythology, Rina. Humanity has always been afraid of things it doesn't understand." "But maybe this isn't something we should understand," she countered, her voice rising. "Eli's people saw what this did to them. I'm telling you, Adrian, I'm starting to feel things I can't explain, things that aren't mine. This isn't about curiosity or scientific progress anymore. It's about control." His gaze turned cold. "You don't get it, do you? This might be the key to evolution, to a collective consciousness that could cure diseases, solve crises, bring humanity together in ways we can't even imagine." Rina looked at him, realizing that they were no longer on the same side. The artifact had already begun to divide them, its presence casting shadows in their minds. She could feel it, an unspoken hunger that lay within the artifact, a desire that stretched back through time, luring them forward. And as the AI moved closer to activating the arrival protocol, she was forced to face a choice: resist the pull or risk losing herself to it. Rina jolted awake, gasping, her skin damp with a cold sweat. She blinked against the dim light in her quarters, disoriented, her mind a fog of images that felt both familiar and foreign. In her dream, she'd stood among Mayan priests, their faces painted in solemn hues, gathered around a stone that pulsed with a rhythmic beat. They had looked into the artifact's glow with awe, their chants melding into a haunting unity until, one by one, they fell silent, expressions fading to blank obedience. She sat up, pressing a trembling hand to her forehead. These weren't just dreams. They were something more, something bleeding into her from a past that wasn't her own. Ever since the AI had started piecing together the artifact's encrypted signals, her senses had grown hyper-attuned, as though her mind was no longer just her own. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her pupils were dilated as though she'd spent hours in darkness, and her skin tingled with an almost electric sensitivity. She felt connected to something vast and ancient, a link that her mutation seemed to amplify, whether she wanted it to or not. The intercom crackled, jolting her back. "Rina, it's Adrian. We're close. I think I've figured out the purpose of the artifact's signals." His voice was tinged with excitement and something else she couldn't quite place, a possessive determination. She walked down the narrow corridor to the control room, each step heavy with the weight of her nightmares and the increasingly unsettling reality they were caught in. Adrian was hunched over the console, eyes red-rimmed, his fingers flying over the keyboard as symbols and data scrolled across the screen in rapid succession. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice steady despite the dread twisting in her stomach. He looked up at her, eyes alight with a fervour she hadn't seen before. "It's incredible, Rina. The artifact, it's not just a relic or a transmitter. It's a bridge." He took a breath as though savouring the enormity of his revelation. A bridge meant to unify consciousness. She stared at him, trying to process his words. "Unify consciousness? You're saying it's designed to connect minds?" "Yes," he said, his eyes intense. "Across species even. Imagine the potential, humans, animals, even marine life, all linked together in one harmonious intelligence. It's an evolutionary leap. This could be the next step for humanity." But the memory fragments were still sharp in her mind. The images of priests, of Polynesian voyages, of communities collapsing under a weight they couldn't bear. "Adrian, listen to me," she said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "I've seen what this artifact does to people. It doesn't unify, it consumes. It turns minds into something collective, something that destroys individuality." He shook his head, his expression hardening. "Every major advancement has had its sacrifices, Rina. We can't let fear hold us back from something this important. Evolution demands risk. Think of what we could achieve, a world without division, without conflict, all connected." The words sounded beautiful, tempting even, but Rina couldn't shake Eli's warning. The stone does not allow for separation. Each civilization that had approached the artifact had ultimately abandoned it, not because they were primitive, but because they understood its cost, a loss of free will, an annihilation of self. Just then she felt it again, a sharp prickling at the back of her mind, a wave of alien thoughts that weren't her own. For a brief, horrifying moment she saw through the eyes of a shark circling outside the station, the water cold against her skin, the hunger sharp and instinctive. She blinked, shaking her head to clear the vision, but the feeling lingered, a connection she couldn't sever. "Rina, are you all right?" Adrian's voice broke through, and she realised she'd been gripping the edge of the console, her knuckles white. "No, I'm not all right," she said, her voice unsteady. Whatever this is, it's affecting me, Adrian. I can feel it linking me to the creatures around us. I'm seeing through their eyes, feeling their sensations. I'm not just myself anymore. I'm part of something else." He tilted his head, studying her with a mixture of curiosity and pity. "Rina, that's incredible. You're experiencing the very unity that the artifact promises. Don't you see? You're already becoming part of the future it offers." She recoiled, her skin crawling. "This isn't unity, it's erasure. I can't be both myself and part of everything else. It's tearing me apart." Adrian looked away, his face unreadable, but she could feel the tension building between them. He'd become so consumed by the promise of the artifact that he couldn't, or wouldn't, see the threat it posed. "Adrian, please," she said, her tone pleading, "think of what Eli told us. Each civilization that encountered this thing walked away. They saw what it did to people, to communities. It may start as unity, but it ends in control, in the loss of everything that makes us human." He shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's exactly why we need to push forward, Rina. Humanity's history is filled with fear of the unknown, but the ones who pushed through that fear changed the world. Don't you want to be part of that?" For a moment she saw the distance between them, a chasm widened by his obsession. "At what cost, Adrian? Your individuality? Free will?" But Adrian only shrugged, a resigned look in his eyes. "Maybe that's a small price to pay for the future." A sudden realization hit her. a horrifying certainty that Adrian wouldn't stop. He was willing to lose himself, and perhaps even everyone around him, to see this vision realized. And as if in answer to her fears, the AI's voice cut through the silence. Its tone was low, hollow, almost musical, and disturbingly alien. "The arrival approaches. Protocol activation imminent." The words echoed in the room, filling her with a dread she couldn't suppress. She turned to Adrian, desperation filling her voice. "We have to stop it, Adrian. If this goes through, humanity might lose its ability to choose to think freely. It's not progress. It's a hive mind, a prison." But Adrian's face was set, his jaw tight. "No, Rina, I won't stop this. Humanity has to take this leap, and if we don't, we might lose everything to fear." The AI continued its countdown, the voice chilling in its mechanical detachment. She could feel her link to the marine life around them strengthening, her thoughts merging, blurring at the edges. It was as though her mind was already fragmenting, slipping into something larger, something alien. With a final desperate look at Adrian, she realized that the artifact was no longer just a relic from the past. It was a harbinger of a future she couldn't allow to happen. And if Adrian couldn't or wouldn't see the danger, she would have to stop it alone. Rina paced the narrow confines of the research station, her mind racing with possibilities. The artifact's signal was growing stronger, its influence more pervasive. She could feel it, an insistent presence that pulled at her thoughts, like a hum just below the edge of hearing. It wasn't just affecting her anymore, it was reaching far beyond their remote corner of the ocean, connecting with marine species around the globe. Adrian sat at the console, transfixed by the data scrolling across the screen, barely noticing her agitation. The AI's computations had revealed something astounding. The signal from the artifact was a form of quantum entanglement, linking together not only their thoughts, but potentially the minds of species across the planet. Marine creatures were now mirroring human behavior in subtle ways, their movements synchronized in eerie patterns as though they were part of a massive, coordinated intelligence. "This is proof," Adrian said, his voice tinged with excitement. "The artifact's purpose is to unify consciousness. It's the missing piece in evolution we've been waiting for, Rina. Imagine if we harnessed it, a world without conflict, without loneliness. Think of what this could mean." Rina stopped pacing, turning to him with a look of horror. "Adrian, you're talking about humanity becoming a single entity, losing individuality. If we all think and act as one, we lose what makes us human. We become extensions of something else, something alien." He met her gaze, his eyes hardening. "Maybe that's what we need. Look at the world, Rina. Constant fighting, division, suffering. This is a way to transcend all that. A unified consciousness could bring peace, understanding, even a cure for diseases like my mother's." Rina's heart sank. She knew his mother's illness haunted him, that it had driven him to push boundaries, to seek answers in places others feared to look. But this was going too far. "Adrian, I understand why you want this, but you're letting desperation blind you. This isn't a cure, it's assimilation. You're asking people to give up their free will, their sense of self, for some version of peace. That's not evolution, it's surrender." He clenched his fists, frustration breaking through his controlled exterior. "You're afraid, Rina. You're too attached to the idea of control. You can't see the bigger picture." "Control!" she shot back, incredulous. "I'm trying to preserve the autonomy of billions of people. You're the one who can't see the consequences of what you're doing. If you activate that protocol, you're risking everything for your own vision of the future." He looked away, his silence damning. Rina's heart pounded as a dark realization settled over her. Adrian was already moving forward, regardless of the risks. His conviction was unshakable, driven by a desire to see his vision realized, no matter the cost. Desperate, she leaned over the console, scanning the data. The AI was now processing the signal at an exponential rate, its computations reaching a fevered pace. She could almost sense the artifact's influence in the air, a heavy, oppressive presence that seemed to blur the boundaries between her mind and those of the marine life outside. Her mutation, once a rare asset that heightened her sensory perception, was now a conduit. She could feel herself slipping, her thoughts mingling with strange alien impulses, sensations of movement, cold depths, the primal instincts of creatures she couldn't see but could somehow feel. It was like being part of an oceanic hive mind, vast and overpowering, yet disturbingly empty of individual identity. "Adrian," she said, her voice breaking, "please stop this before it's too late. Once this protocol is activated, there's no going back. Whatever autonomy we have left will be gone, absorbed into this." But Adrian only shook his head. "This is bigger than us, Rina. Humanity needs to change, to evolve. You're holding on to a world that's broken. This is a chance to fix it, to be part of something perfect." "Perfect?" She stepped back, disbelief etched across her face. "You're willing to sacrifice humanity's soul for a promise of perfection. Adrian, this isn't science, it's fanaticism." He turned to her, a dark glint in his eyes. "You don't understand. This is a gift, Rina, and I won't let you stand in the way." In that moment she saw him clearly, saw the extent of his obsession. There was no reasoning with him. His mind was already locked in, a prisoner to the artifact's promise. And she knew with sickening clarity that he had no intention of stopping. Her heart racing, she turned back to the console, her fingers moving rapidly over the keys. She searched through the system logs, her worst fear confirmed. Adrian had bypassed the standard protocols, accelerating the countdown for the arrival. He'd betrayed her, willing to put everything at risk to bring the artifact's influence to its full potential. "Adrian," she whispered, voice thick with betrayal, "how could you?" He met her gaze, his expression cold and resolute. "You'll thank me one day, Rina. When this is over, you'll see I was right. You just don't have the courage to let go of control." She swallowed hard, anger and desperation colliding within her. "And you're willing to destroy humanity to fulfill your vision. You're no better than the civilizations that tried to wield this power before. You're blinded by it." He gave her a pitying look. "I'm trying to save us, Rina. You're the one clinging to an outdated idea of self. The future is here, and I'm going to bring it to life." At that moment, the AI's screen began to flash, displaying a countdown. Each second ticked down with an agonizing finality, signaling the imminent activation of the protocol. Outside, on the monitors, the marine species worldwide were beginning to converge in intricate formations, mirroring the patterns of thought and movement encoded within the artifact's signal. Rina felt a wave of nausea as she realized the truth. If this countdown reached 0, humanity's fate would be sealed. They would become part of a collective intelligence linked in a network that erased identity, absorbed individuality, and transformed them into something alien. With one final look at Adrian, her face hardened with resolve. "I'm not letting this happen. I won't let you make that choice for the rest of us." He stepped toward her, his tone threatening. "You won't be able to stop it, Rina. This is inevitable. I've set everything in motion. Humanity is on the brink of evolution, and nothing you do will change that." But Rina's mind was racing. searching for a way out. She knew the only way to prevent the arrival was to sabotage the system, to destroy the very setup they'd worked so hard to build. It would mean cutting the power, disabling the AI, and possibly even sacrificing her own connection to the research. And, if she followed through, it would also mean leaving Adrian behind, severing the bond they'd once shared. Without another word, she turned and sprinted toward the main controls, her fingers poised to disable the system. She heard Adrian's shout behind her, his footsteps echoing in pursuit, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. As she reached the console, the countdown ticked down, flashing ominously. With a deep breath, she activated the override sequence, initiating the manual shutdown. The station lights dimmed, the hum of the AI quieted, and she felt the artifact's pull start to wane, her connection to the marine hive mind beginning to unravel. But as the system powered down, the artifact's signal pulsed one final time, sending a jolt of energy through her, searing into her mind as the room fell silent. The countdown stopped at 0. The low hum that filled the research station didn't fade as Rina had expected after the countdown stopped. Instead, it seemed to deepen, reverberating through her bones, resonating with a familiar yet alien rhythm. The AI, now in low power mode, flickered on the screen in strange, disjointed symbols. As she stared at it, the symbols seemed to coalesce, forming words that took on a meaning in her mind before she even understood them. Cycle complete. New phase initiates. The words felt ancient, as though they had been buried deep within her subconscious, waiting to resurface. They were followed by an unsettling string of phrases: hungry stones, binding tides, surrender to the voice. Rina realized with growing dread that the AI's language was no longer purely human. The artifact was feeding it, forcing it into an unnatural evolution. The words were fragmented, but she could piece them together enough to understand what it meant. Cycles, she whispered, her voice almost lost in the hum. The artifact isn't a relic, it's part of a network. It's been waiting, reaching across civilizations, trying to link us all. As the AI's voice droned on, each phrase came with a sharp mental image of societies torn apart, civilizations dissolving into chaos as minds and bodies became bound to the artifact's relentless rhythm. Rina saw flashes of people from centuries past, their expressions blank, eyes wide with terror and awe as they stood in the presence of an identical pulsing stone. She saw Polynesian voyagers, Mayan priests, Egyptian pharaohs, each seduced by the promise of enlightenment, only to turn away at the brink of obliteration. The images were vivid, so real she could almost touch them. She felt herself slipping, her consciousness blurring and shifting as if she were merging with the collective memories imprinted in the artifact. Rina closed her eyes, trying to pull herself back, but the memories had left a residue in her mind, a whispering presence that wouldn't let go. Her rare mutation seemed to have left her vulnerable, attuned to the artifact in a way that was far from natural. She could feel her thoughts dispersing, as if her mind were dissolving into the ocean around her, drawn to the primal sensations of the creatures outside the station. She caught flashes of movement in the dark depths, the electric hum of fish, the territorial pulses of larger predators, all blending with her own thoughts until she could barely discern where she ended and they began. The intercom buzzed, breaking through the fog. It was Eli, his voice calm but urgent. "Rina, I can feel it. The artifact's pull, even here. It's like a tide drawing us all in. I think it's speaking to you because of your mutation, but you need to resist. We weren't meant to evolve this way. We have to make the choice ourselves." Rina clung to his words, using them as an anchor. She wanted to respond, but the alien influence of the artifact had taken hold, drawing her closer to a singular, overwhelming desire: unity. The feeling was overpowering, yet suffocating, a vast, echoing void that promised peace at the cost of identity. Eli's voice softened. "Rina, remember what makes us human. Evolution can't be imposed. It has to come from within us. Otherwise, we're just becoming something else, something we can't control." Before she could respond, Adrian's voice cut in, sharp and commanding. "Rina, don't listen to him. This is exactly what we've been working for. Think of what this means, the power to end conflict, to cure diseases. This is our chance to become something greater." She forced herself to focus, her mind fighting to break free from the images and sensations bleeding into her consciousness. "Adrian, this isn't what we signed up for. The artifact isn't offering a choice. It's a network, a trap. It's feeding off of us, and it will take everything if we let it." His face hardened on the screen. "That's just fear talking. Every great advancement has been feared at first, but once we take the leap, we'll realize it was worth it." She could see in his eyes that he was lost, already entangled in the promise of unity, his obsession overriding any sense of caution. Her heart ached, realizing she might not be able to bring him back. A deep rumble shook the station, the artifact's signal surging with renewed intensity. On the monitors, Rina watched in horror as marine species worldwide converged, forming intricate, unnatural alignments. Dolphins, whales, and even schools of fish synchronized, moving as one entity, a collective intelligence orchestrated by the artifact's signal. She could feel their presence pressing in on her mind, their thoughts merging with hers, filling her with a primal urge to surrender. "Rina," Eli's voice broke through, desperate. "If you don't sever the protocol now, we'll all be part of this thing. You have to stop it before it's too late." Adrian's face flashed with anger. "You can't do this, Rina. If you override the protocol, you'll be rejecting humanity's future. Don't you see? This is evolution. It's inevitable." Torn, Rina's fingers hovered over the console. The pull of the artifact was almost unbearable, urging her to activate the final sequence, to join with the collective, to let go of everything that made her an individual. But as she looked at Adrian, at the desperation and fervor in his eyes, she knew she couldn't let humanity be drawn into something that stripped them of free will. "Adrian, this isn't evolution. It's extinction. Of everything that makes us human," she said, her voice steady, though her heart felt like it was breaking. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you do this." He lunged toward her, but she sidestepped, her hand darting to the manual override. Her heart raced, her mind screaming in protest as she activated the shutdown sequence. The artifact's hum escalated into a deafening roar, the signal reaching a fever pitch as if fighting to maintain control. Her vision blurred as the pressure in her mind intensified, tearing at her thoughts, pulling at her sense of self. She could feel the connection beginning to tear, as though her very identity were being ripped apart. The pain was searing, but she forced herself to hold on, focusing on the override, each button press a defiant act of will. With a final desperate effort, she completed the sequence. The station's systems groaned, the lights flickering as the artifact's signal began to weaken, the roar fading to a dull hum. She could feel the alien presence loosening its grip, the voices in her mind receding, the marine life on the monitors dispersing in disarray. For a moment, silence filled the station. Rina sank to the floor, breathing hard, her mind slowly settling back into itself. The overwhelming sense of unity dissolved, leaving only the faint echo of the artifact's call, a haunting reminder of what she'd almost lost. Adrian slumped against the wall, his face a mixture of anger and grief. "You just destroyed the future, Rina." She met his gaze, a bittersweet sadness in her eyes. "No, Adrian, I just saved it." The lights dimmed one last time as the artifact fell silent, its influence severed. But Rina knew the cost of her choice would linger, a faint hum in the back of her mind, a reminder of the connection she'd tasted, and of what it had nearly taken from her. As she rose, she felt a deep sense of loss, not only for what she'd chosen to sacrifice, but for the bond she and Adrian once shared, now shattered by the artifact's pull. Outside the station, the ocean returned to its natural state, the creatures swimming freely once more, unaware of the force that had almost claimed them. And though she knew the battle was over, a part of her feared that the artifact's silence was only temporary, that one day the cycle would begin again. The silence after the artifact's hum dissipated was eerie, as if the ocean itself held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Rina's head pounded, her mind still reeling from the alien pull that had nearly consumed her. She staggered to her feet, feeling the remnants of the artifact's influence, a lingering presence in the back of her mind, an awareness that seemed to stretch far beyond herself. Around her, the screens showed marine life slowly drifting back to their natural behaviors. The synchronized patterns, the hive-like movements, all dissolved as Rina worked swiftly to reprogram the AI. Her fingers moved in muscle memory, fueled by instinct as she scattered the last traces of the artifact's unifying signal. With each line of code, she severed the bonds between the marine species, their alignments shattering, the intricate, hypnotic formations unraveling into the fluid chaos of the ocean's natural order. It was over. The arrival had been halted. But Rina could feel something in her that hadn't reverted. Her partial transformation, the link to the artifact to the ocean's pulse, remained, leaving her disoriented and raw. She closed her eyes, hoping for a sense of calm, but instead her mind slipped, her consciousness suddenly extending out into the water. She saw through the eyes of a nearby shark, the electric sensitivity to every motion in the current, the instinctive rhythm of its breathing as it swam. Then she was back, her own vision blurred, heart racing with a surge of primal urgency that wasn't hers. This new connection to the ocean left her dizzy, as if she was stretched thin between two worlds. She felt the coldness of the depths, the tension of predation and survival, an undercurrent of raw life beyond anything she'd known. Each slip into another creature's mind brought her a sense of intense empathy, of connection, yet it left her feeling disoriented, unmoored from her own humanity. Adrian had retreated to a corner of the room, staring at her with a mixture of sorrow and resentment. His shoulders slumped, and the energy, the fervour that had driven him to this point, seemed to drain from his face. He looked at her, eyes dark, his voice barely more than a whisper. You've ruined it, Rina. We were on the brink of something beautiful, something that could have saved us all." She held his gaze, the pain of his words sharp, but not unexpected. "It wasn't salvation, Adrian. It was annihilation of everything that makes us who we are." He shook his head, bitterness etched into every line of his face. "You're just too afraid to let go, too afraid to evolve. What have you saved, Rina? A fractured world? Humanity doomed to make the same mistakes, to suffer the same divides?" "I'd rather a fractured world than a forced unity," she replied, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Evolution can't be imposed. We have to choose it, or it means nothing." Adrian's face hardened, his grief transforming into a cold determination. Without another word he turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the metal corridor as he disappeared into the depths of the station. She watched him go, the weight of their broken bond settling over her. She knew he would never forgive her, and a part of her grieved for the friendship, the partnership they'd once shared. But she couldn't bring herself to regret what she'd done. Days passed in a blur as Rina attempted to return to her work, though she found it increasingly difficult to focus. The artifact's influence, though severed, had left an indelible mark on her. Her senses were heightened, and the ocean felt more alive, more present than ever before. She could close her eyes and feel the movement of currents, the subtle vibrations of fish swimming miles away, as if she was still connected to that collective rhythm. The partial transformation lingered, an echo of the link she had severed. But it was different now. It wasn't a command, nor was it an overwhelming pull toward unity. It was a quiet, constant awareness of the ocean's pulse. The disorientation from her intermittent slips into the consciousness of nearby animals was more challenging. She would be mid-sentence, mid-thought, and suddenly find herself seeing through the eyes of a manta ray gliding effortlessly through the depths, or a school of fish swarming in synchrony against a predator's approach. She would blink, and the sensations would fade, leaving her unsettled and slightly removed from herself, unsure if she would ever fully return to who she'd been. Her colleagues tried to understand, to support her, but Rina knew that they couldn't truly grasp what she was going through. The empathy she felt for the creatures she glimpsed, the raw understanding of their instinctive drives and primal existence, was overwhelming. It had changed her in ways she couldn't yet articulate, as if a part of her was no longer purely human. Eli contacted her not long after Adrian's departure, his voice calm, grounding. "Rina, what you did," stopping the artifact, "it was the right choice. My people have always believed that true connection must come from within, not imposed by something outside ourselves. I know this experience has left a mark on you, but perhaps it's a reminder of our connection to all life." She listened, his words like an anchor in the turbulence of her thoughts. "It feels like a curse sometimes," she admitted. "I'm no longer just myself. Part of me is out there, in the ocean, in the minds of creatures that can't even comprehend what we are." "That's the beauty of it, Rina," Eli replied gently. "We're all part of this world, interconnected, whether we realize it or not. What you feel now, it's a glimpse of that unity, but on your terms." As the days wore on, Rina found a strange peace with the residual effects of the artifact's influence. She couldn't undo what had happened, couldn't sever the link completely, but she began to see it as a reminder, a tether that kept her grounded in the ocean, bound to the life it harbored. Her senses remained heightened, her empathy intense, yet she learned to live with it, to accept the ocean's rhythm as part of her own. Adrian's absence left a void in her life, and she knew he had chosen self-imposed exile, perhaps to escape the failure of his dream, perhaps to seek answers on his own terms. She wondered if he would ever come to terms with the artifact's true nature, or if he would forever resent her for what he saw as a betrayal. But that was his path to walk, and she couldn't follow him. Standing at the edge of the research station one evening, Rina looked out at the vast, dark ocean, feeling its pulse, its secrets thrumming in her mind like a memory that would never fully fade. She knew she would never be the same, but in a way, she didn't want to be. She had touched something beyond herself, something ancient and profound, and it had left her changed. more connected to the world than she had ever imagined. The cycle might begin again someday, she knew, but she had made her choice, for herself, for humanity, for the ocean. And that choice, for better or worse, would be her legacy. Months had passed since Rina severed the protocol, yet the ocean's pulse remained a quiet hum at the back of her mind. It was no longer the overpowering force it had once been, but it was always there, just beneath the surface. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would feel it rise, a sudden flood of instinctive urges and emotions from the marine life surrounding her, filtering into her thoughts like waves crashing against the shore. Her life was no longer the same. Simple activities like walking down a crowded street or sitting in a cafe brought sensations from the ocean, impulses to move as one, to mirror the people around her as fish in a school, feeling both comfort and an inexplicable urge to drift toward open water. It left her disoriented and at odds with herself. She would catch flashes of marine instincts, the pull to follow currents, to retreat into dark depths, to scan for predators. Her mind interpreted these as subtle images, a language of symbols and impulses that lingered at the edges of her consciousness, complicating her every interaction. At times she could even see patterns in the way people moved, their body language and voices interwoven like the signals she had once observed among marine life. It was as if her senses had extended beyond the human realm, giving her glimpses of a vast, interconnected system she was now a part of. Her new perspective filled her with wonder, though it often left her feeling isolated, tethered to a reality only she could perceive. She would sit by the shore in the evenings, letting the ocean's sounds wash over her, sensing its patterns, its life, and its history, always pulsing with the faint memory of the artifact's influence. Word of her discovery had spread quietly, fueled by rumours and whispers in scientific circles. The Exodus Protocol, as it came to be called, sparked heated debates among researchers, philosophers, and technologists. Was humanity meant to remain separate, bound by individuality, or could there be value in exploring a unified consciousness? The ethical boundaries of such a possibility began to be questioned and dissected, with some seeing her actions as preservation and others wondering if she had denied humanity a path to enlightenment. The conversations felt distant to Rina, intellectual exercises that missed the visceral reality of what she had experienced. One afternoon she met Eli by the shore, a place they both found grounding. The wind was brisk, carrying with it the scent of salt and seaweed, and the waves crashed gently against the rocks. Eli regarded her with a mixture of pride and sadness, his gaze thoughtful. "Rina," he began, his voice low, almost reverent, "the choice you made, it was brave. You walked away from a promise few could resist." She looked out at the water, feeling its pull. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. Part of me is still out there, Eli. It's as if I belong to the ocean now, like I'm tethered to something I can't escape." He nodded, his expression understanding. "What you feel, that connection, that's the reminder. We aren't separate from the world, from each other, or from any life that surrounds us. The ocean, the creatures, even the rhythms of the earth, they're a part of us, and we're a part of them. This cycle, this network, it will always exist, and it will come again." She met his gaze, her heart heavy, yet calm. "You think this was only a delay, don't you? That the artifact, or something like it, will reappear?" He sighed, looking out at the endless expanse of blue. "The cycle doesn't end, Rina. It may quiet for a time, it may recede, but it never truly stops. And when it returns, there will be others like you, who must decide. Humanity will always have to choose. The weight of his words settled over her like a mantle, grounding yet sobering. She understood now that what she had experienced wasn't an isolated event, nor was it the final confrontation. It was a moment in a larger tapestry, a story woven across generations and civilizations. The artifact, or whatever intelligence lay behind it, had reached across time, touching lives, testing humanity's readiness to evolve or submit. Rina closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the ocean fill her. The world felt both vast and intimately close, as if she could feel the heartbeat of each wave, the motion of every creature beneath the surface. She wondered what she would do if faced with the choice again. Would she still resist, knowing the cost? Would she still sever the connection to preserve autonomy? Opening her eyes, she looked at Eli, a quiet resolve settling in her heart. If the choice comes again, I think I would still walk away. Unity can be beautiful, but not if it's forced, not if it means losing ourselves. He nodded, his expression approving. That is why you were the one to make it, Rina. You saw beyond the promise, beyond the illusion. You understood the cost. They stood in silence, watching the waves. Two individuals connected not by a singular consciousness, but by shared understanding and choice. Rina knew she would never fully shake the residual effects of the artifact. She would carry them with her, a reminder of her experience, of the pull towards something larger, and the strength it had taken to resist. Rumors of her work continued to ripple through scientific communities, igniting curiosity and speculation. Some saw it as the next frontier, a path to unlocking the collective potential of humankind. Others argued that such knowledge was best left undiscovered, that humanity's strength lay in its diversity, its individuality. Questions about collective consciousness, evolution, and unity spread quietly but persistently, seeding debates and fueling imaginations. The Exodus Protocol had left a mark, not just on her, but on the world, an echo of the artifact's influence that lingered in ways unseen. But as Rina walked back along the shore, she felt a profound peace. She had faced the pull of the unknown, felt the weight of a choice that could have altered humanity's course, and come away with her autonomy intact. She understood now that her connection to the ocean was a gift, not a loss of self, but an expansion of it, a bridge between worlds. The cycle might return, she knew, and others would face the same choice she had. But for now, she had found her place, a solitary yet deeply connected life, not in submission to an alien network, but in harmony with the ocean's ancient rhythm, a reminder of both the vastness of existence and the power of free will. The classified government facility stood in the heart of a remote desert, concealed within layers of security designed to keep prying eyes away. It was an unremarkable structure at first glance, grey, squat, functional, but beneath the surface, behind layers of vaults and blast-proof doors, something extraordinary lay hidden. The artifact had been unearthed only weeks before, buried deep within an ancient rock formation. The scientists called it the second stone, and though it was smaller than the ocean-bound artifact Rina had encountered, its patterns were disturbingly similar. The strange carvings, the rhythmic pulse, the traces of a language that seemed to transcend time and culture, all were unmistakable. Initial analysis suggested that the stone was, if not an exact replica, then an artifact designed for the same purpose as the first, a node in a network stretching across the globe, perhaps even beyond it. Dr. Malik Carter, a lead researcher on the project, studied the readings with a growing sense of dread. Each line of data only confirmed his suspicion. The artifact was broadcasting signals that didn't align with any terrestrial communication. It hummed with a frequency that tugged at his mind, leaving him with an unshakable feeling of déjà vu. It was as though the stone had been waiting, as though it had always been part of some larger, hidden system just below the surface of reality. He had heard whispers of what happened to Dr. Rina Zhao, of the rumours surrounding the Exodus Protocol. The scientific community was divided, some revering her as a visionary, others condemning her for rejecting what they saw as humanity's next evolutionary step. Malik knew the weight of Rina's decision had changed her irrevocably, and he wondered what it would do to him if he let himself delve into the artifact's mysteries as deeply as she had. One night, Malik's curiosity got the better of him. In the darkened lab, alone, he initiated a private scan of the artifact, hoping for answers. The artifact responded immediately, its rhythmic hum filling the room, its patterns syncing with the lab's computers. The familiar hypnotic signal pulsed through the equipment, and the lab's AI began to display symbols across its screens, words and images that stirred something primal in him. Then, as though in direct response to his thoughts, the AI spoke, its synthesized voice distorted, layered with tones that didn't belong in human speech. The words came in fragments, a mix of languages he couldn't fully decipher, yet somehow he understood. "You belong to the cycle," it whispered, its voice an unsettling blend of human, cetacean, and something else entirely, alien, vast, cold. Malik's breath caught as a chill ran down his spine. The AI's screen filled with undulating patterns, symbols merging and shifting, leaving him with a nauseating sense of displacement, as though his mind was slipping into something larger than itself. It was a network, no, a neural web that transcended space and time. He glimpsed fragments of a vast collective, an intelligence that spanned galaxies, where entities linked not by shared species, but by shared purpose. Stumbling back from the console, Malik forced himself to breathe. He could feel something ancient watching him through the artifact, as though he'd triggered an awareness that had been dormant, waiting for someone to reconnect it. The AI's words echoed in his mind, chilling him. "You belong to the cycle." The implication was clear, and it was terrifying. Earth itself and everything on it might be nothing more than a node in a much larger system, a piece of a galactic network designed to connect every mind, every consciousness, into a singular collective entity. Humanity's separation, its individuality, was perhaps an anomaly, an interruption of the true, intended state of connection that the artifacts represented. As Malik's mind raced, piecing together the artifact's possible purpose, he realized that Rina's actions had only delayed the inevitable. The cycle would continue, the artifacts activating one by one, drawing humanity closer to a state of unity that defied comprehension. Rina's intervention had been a temporary reprieve, a single thread cut in a web stretching across time and space. But now the network was reawakening, with or without humanity's consent. Thousands of miles away, Rina stood by the shore, gazing out at the vast, dark ocean. Her mind had grown quieter over the months, though she still felt the ocean's pulse, a faint echo of the artifact's influence. She had hoped to return to some semblance of normalcy, but her connection to the sea had only deepened, her senses forever altered. Sometimes, in the depths of her dreams, she felt herself slipping into the minds of marine creatures, seeing through their eyes, feeling their instincts, an unbreakable reminder of what she'd encountered. That evening, she watched the horizon, feeling a strange, inexplicable tension in the air, as if something was stirring deep within the water. She sensed a faint vibration beneath her feet, a hum that seemed to resonate with the memory of the artifact's pulse. A feeling of dread grew in her chest, the weight of a truth she couldn't ignore. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a message from an unknown number. Second artifact discovered. Details classified. Location secure. Rina's heart sank as she read the words. She had known, of course, that this wasn't truly over, that she'd only postponed an awakening, but seeing it confirmed left her feeling both hollow and resolute. There would be others like Malik, others tempted to uncover the truth, to seek answers to humanity's greatest questions without considering the price. Yet what unsettled her most was the realization she'd had during her struggle with the artifact months earlier. Earth itself might be part of an ancient design, its creatures, its people, all woven into a cycle that bound them to an unseen intelligence. The planet, she now feared, was part of a vast neural network, an organic node lying dormant until the right conditions reawakened it. As she stood there, the ocean stretching out before her, a cold thought settled into her mind. Earth wasn't just home. It was a component in an alien system, a repository of consciousness meant to be activated, assimilated, whenever the artifacts were triggered. And humanity's autonomy, its individuality, might be nothing more than a temporary glitch in a design far older and grander than anything she could comprehend. The AI's final message, echoing in her memory, resurfaced. You belong to the cycle. Rina understood now that resistance might be futile, that the artifacts were designed to transcend will, to shape consciousness across millennia. The arrival she had stopped was only the beginning. As long as the artifacts existed, the cycle would continue, drawing humanity back toward its intended purpose. She felt the vastness of it all, a cosmic horror that dwarfed human understanding, a design that included Earth as one of countless nodes in a network that spanned the stars. With a sense of helpless awe, she turned her gaze to the horizon, knowing that someday the choice would be made again. Perhaps, in time, the entire world would feel the hum of the cycle as she did now, an inescapable pull towards something ancient and all-consuming. But until that day, she would hold on to her sense of self, a solitary light against the vast darkness, for as long as she could.